Hi everyone, welcome back. Good news, I got the replacement SKR 1.4 turbo board and it's installed and working. A big thanks to Geeetech on Amazon for sending the replacement quickly and without any problems or issues. While it was apart, I did make some changes in the wiring and I want to talk about that as well as some of the changes to Marlin and some of the other trials and tribulations I went through along the way. So, let's get started.
Okay, let's talk about the wiring first. So the first thing I did and I wanted to do after taking the old board back out was get those bare end wire clamp things, get the bootlace ferrules put on. So what I did to get it the way I wanted it was I took the ferrule, and as you can see it here, I cut the little plastic insulation completely off it, and it's pretty easy. Make 3-4 cuts long ways down it up to the metal and then bend it out and it slides right off the front. Then once you have that done, strip your wire back like that, and I hope the camera's focusing, I really can't tell, and slide it all the way on until it butts all the way up against the insulation on the wiring. Then take your tool and trying to make sure not to go too high on it and crush that little end. We don't want to do that. There we go. We're going to push that completely in until the insulation is up against it, and then we're going to crimp it like that. Hope that's on camera. Then what I did was, since this is too long to go all the way in, I trimmed the whole thing back right on one of those little ridges it leaves. I'm trying not to make a mess here. I want to be able to see that. So it cuts very easily with these little snippers. Just trim it back. It kind of smashes it a little bit, so put it back in the crimper one more time and give it a crimp to make it square again. And shove that in as far as it'll go in your connector all the way up to the wire insulation. Now you have that nice square ferrule to clamp on, and you still can get a nice tight, 90 degree or 45, that's 90 degree bend out of it. So I did that. Also, the wires for the 3D touch sensor. Now, I don't know about this if you're using a BL touch, but for me, the 3D touch sensor had two connectors, a 3-pin connector and a 2-pin connector. There are places marked on the new board, I think it's called servos, and I forget what the other one is called, but they're right next to each other. The 3-pin connector was correct. I had to reverse the position of the wires in the 2-pin connector. If the sensor lights up when the pin is deployed and goes out when it's stowed, that's wrong. Reverse those wires and things will start to work right again. Other than that, I think that's all I really did other than the changes to Marlin. So let's go over to my computer and let's look at the changes to Marlin.
Okay, so this is Marlin 2.0.7.2, which was the latest version at the time that I recorded this. This is not the version of Marlin that came from Geeetech with a bunch of changes already made. Because of the bad board and the bad driver, I was having problems that I couldn't figure out. So I went to the latest version of Marlin with a vanilla version of it with no changes in it at all in an attempt to troubleshoot some of my problems. Now, in the past, I have used both Arduino IDE and A10m and Platform IO to flash these changes, but Platform IO no longer supports A10m, so this is VS Code, and Platform IO, I also have Auto Build Marlin put in to make things a little easier, and I have just been copying the firmware.bin file to the micro SD card and putting it in the printer and either resetting the printer or turning the power off and on, or on if it was off. When you, or at least in my case, when I enabled SD card support for the card slot that is on the LCD panel, it made the micro SD card slot that's on the SKR board useless for anything other than flashing. You can't even access it from the control. If you try it from the from the LCD, if you try it, it just locks up it locks the firmware up. And that's fine for me since I despise micro SD cards. I'm always dropping them and losing them. I would much rather use the full-size SD card or even better, just stick a USB memory stick in the USB port on the LCD panel. So with that being said, this is a vanilla, or was a vanilla version of the latest Marlin, and I made changes to configuration H and configuration ADVH. Some of these will be for my specific setup. Well, they're all going to be for my specific setup, but some of them may apply to you too, and some of them may not. One other thing to touch on is some of my changes would not take, for want of a better way to put it, in the firmware. I could, no matter what changes I made to them here and flashed, they did not change. And that really had me scratching my head for a while till I figured it out. And I still don't know why it's doing it. The firmware is obviously flashing, other changes are going, but there's a couple settings that simply will not, and I have to make the changes from the LCD panel. And I'll mention those when I get to them. This may be a problem with just me, I don't know, but if you're having them too, maybe that will help you out a bit. So let's look for my changes. One thing I did when I made a change is I commented it with my name. So all I should have to do is type in Chuck and these two libraries. I don't know why they're coming up with Chuck, but there's nothing in there. So let's start in configuration H. I changed the author name. You don't need to mess with that. One thing you must do is you must define the motherboard type correct for the, and this is line 130. What was the previous one? The author is line 73, sorry. Then the defined motherboard in this version of Marlin is line 130. If you're not using 2.0.7.2, the line numbers are going to be slightly different, but I'm going to tell them to you here so you can easily follow along with me. You must get the motherboard name correct because that changes what pin file it pulls up, and nothing's going to work right if you don't. So next down the line 134, custom machine name. I think standard is 3D printer. You can make it whatever you want. It doesn't really affect anything. It's something I was changing around because it was an easy way for me to tell if the firmware had actually flashed. I didn't have to take the card out or read the contents of it. It was just easy for me to do that. So now here's something you'll notice at line 144, define extruders is set to 1. This printer has two extruders. It has a single nozzle, but you need to leave it set to 1. Now you'll notice down at line 150, define single nozzle. For Cyclops or any multi-extruder that shares a single nozzle, well, you think that would apply to the Geeetech A10m, but it does not, and that's why I put this comment here, do not uncomment for mixing hot end. Leave that one commented out for the Geeetech A10m. Now, next thing down at line 302, define mixing extruder. If you have a printer like the Geeetech A10m with a mixing extruder, you need to uncomment this. If you're using an Ender 3 or anything else, don't uncomment it. Now, next thing, define gradient mix. This gives me an option to control the gradient mix, meaning 20 80, 20% of one, 80% of the other, and how it changes from the LCD panel. I wanted that down here at line 307, so I uncommented that. Now the next one down, that was the gradient mix we just did at line 307. Now the temp sensor. I like those Gulf Robotics screw-in temp sensors as opposed to the bulb with the retaining method of tightening a screw down against wires. That's dumb to me. Those screw-in temp sensors are only about $10. I love the things. A standard bulb type temp sensor, you're going to put a 1 in here. For the one screw-in ones, you'll put an 11 in for most of them, but the manufacturer will tell you the number to put in. Temp sensor bed, the original value was 0 for a bed that does not have a hotbed, printer that does not have a hotbed. This does, and it has a standard thermistor, so just leave it to 1 or set it at 1. Now, line 681 and down is where you are going to change the driver type. If you're using anything other than A4988 drivers, you're going to have to change, uncomment it for the ones you're using. I'm using XYZ, E0, and Z1, E1, and I'm using TMC 2209s. Put in what yours are, get it right. Now, this is the first thing I found that didn't change when I changed it here, and that was steps per unit, and I just kept tweaking it on the LCD panel until these first three X, Y, and Z, until my 20 millimeter cube came out at 20 millimeters. This was originally set to something crazy, and I wound up changing it until I got the 20 millimeter cube correct, and the 140 is for the extruder, and I just typically mark 100 millimeters of filament, heat the hot end up, extrude it through, and keep tweaking that until I get exactly 100 millimeters going through. There's some math you can do. You get the number you got, you do the math and whatever, but for me, it's pretty easy to to get that right. Okay, next, define default max feed rate. For some reason, Z was set to 5 by default, which moved my Z axis really slowly, so I bumped it up to 25, which seems like a good number. I just matched it to what E1 was set to. Seems fine there. Now, the default accelerations from line 764 down to line 781. Your acceleration is going to be controlled by your slicer. I have had a lot of issues in the past with Ender 3s and other printers, skipping and shifting because of these giant acceleration numbers, so I just like to change them. But again, you probably don't have to. It's controlled by your slicer. Okay, so the next thing down at line 847, you'll see I have uncommented use probe for Z homing. If you have any kind of automatic bed level system, you're probably going to have to uncomment this. If you uncomment BL Touch without uncommenting this, you'll start getting error messages when you try and build it. So line 847, uncomment, define, use probe for Z homing on the Geeetech A10m if you're using the 3D Touch or any printer with a 3D Touch or BL Touch. Next thing down at line 902, I uncommented define BL Touch because I am using the 3D Touch, which is a blatant ripoff and clone of the BL Touch. It's Geeetech's own. I bought it because it plugs directly into the hot end. So uncommented that. Next thing, since I am using an automatic bed leveling probe, you have to set the probe offset. And that offset is how far away and in what direction it's away from the nozzle. So if the nozzle is, and this little pictogram up here, this kind of tells you how to set it. Plus and minus and a distance in millimeters. And this setup here is just for the 3D Touch, BL Touch, in the Geeetech A10m in the bracket that comes on the printer. So put that there. If yours is different, you'll have to measure it in plus or minus. Go by this little pictogram here. It's really pretty easy to do. That's line 989. Now at line 993, you'll see define probing margin. That's how far away from the edge of the bed the probe is going to be. And it was set to 10 originally. That was probing me off the end of the left side of the bed. I changed it to 20 and it worked fine. So at line 1013, multiple probing I have set to 2. Now this is what the old version of Marlin from the old original board was set to, so I just transferred that over. Now, what's my next one? Here we go. Change it to what it's correct. For me, it's true. I didn't bother with the others since I've only got 2. All right. So down at line 1125 and 1126, I've set the bed size correctly. Ender 3 and Ender 3 clones are 235. I don't care if they say 220, they're 235. Measure it yourself if you're unsure. Zmax position is 250. That was just a tape measure type of setting there for me. What are we next? Software end stops. I cannot remember why I wrote this here. I honestly, I believe I wanted the software end stops to be a menu item, but even with this enabled, I can't find it in any of the menus. Maybe it's there and I just couldn't see it, but whatever. The big Geeetech TFT LCDs, when you're in touchscreen mode, there is a G code window and you can put in any G code you want. So if you need to do something like disable soft end stops in order to get the Z offset set correctly, you can do that entire process from the front panel of the printer. You don't need prana face or a USB connection. It's stupidly easy to do from the front of the printer. All right, next down at line 1237. And okay, yeah, define auto bed leveling linear or bilinear. The Marlin for the old board was set to linear. Somebody, I have this here, Chuck uncommented from some YouTuber I trust. This was either Crosslink or it was Chris over at Chris's basement, Chris's garage, Chris's workshop. I'm sorry, Chris. I always mix you up with somebody else in that regard, but I did watch your video and it did help me a lot. I appreciate that. I set it to bilinear. It seems to work really well. That's again line 1237. Okay, that's where we just were. Okay, at line 1344, define define LCD bed leveling. I want the menu items in the LCD panel for bed leveling. If you want them as well, and you have, if you have an auto bed level system and you want those menu items, uncomment that. The next one down, EEPROM settings. This is going to be line 1474. If you want to be able to save your settings to the EEPROM, and I don't know why you wouldn't want to, because if you don't, every time you turn the printer off and back on, you're going to lose your setting changes. You'll need to uncomment that at line 1474. These preheat settings at line 1505 down to line 1513, you don't have to do anything with these. These are just when you tell it you want it to preheat for PLA or whatever, these are the numbers it's going to go to. It was originally PLA. I forget what the original numbers were. I put in the numbers I like. The next one down was originally ABS. I am never going to print ABS on this printer. It didn't matter what the label was, but I changed it to PETG just because I could, and then change those numbers to what I wanted. So moving on down, we have at line 1727, define SD support. I want the SD cards on the TFT screen. It has a full-size SD card, which I much prefer over the micros, and it also has a USB port as well. I want to be able to use those. So again, at line 1727, I uncommented that as well. Now at line 1807, define individual axis homing menu. I uncommented that because I want to be able to home the different axes, individual of the others. I may only want to home Y or home X or home Z. That lets me do that without homing all three at once. Define speaker. I didn't change this because it wasn't commented out. If you don't want to hear the speaker, comment it out. If you do want to hear it, make sure it's not commented out with the slashes. Everything with the two slashes makes it a comment. All right, the next thing down here is an important one. If you're using the TFT 24 or 35 or 40, whatever, you need to uncomment define RepRap discount full graphics smart controller. Now there is another line that is very, very similar to this one, but not this one. If you get it wrong and do the wrong one like I did the first time, it won't work and you'll have to come back and find this one. This is the correct one for these Big Geeetech TFT boards. Make sure that is uncommented, and that was the last of my changes in configuration H. Yay! So let's go to configuration ADVH, and I made very few changes in this, and almost all of the changes here are for stall guard and sensorless homing. If you're using standard limit switches, you don't need to make most of these. If you want to use sensorless homing, watch, because these are important to get this to work right. So the first one is down at line 656, homing bump MM. These are the original values of these are 5, 5, and 2. You want to make them 0, 0, and 0. Now, the next one is define BL Touch set 5 volt mode. This has nothing to do with sensorless homing. If you're using a BL Touch and your board supports 5 volts, you want to uncomment this. All of the SKR boards, to the best of my knowledge, use 5 volts. If you've got some older board and you're unsure, check before you turn 5 volt mode on, or you will be unhappy after letting the magic blue smoke out of your board because you can't put the magic blue smoke back in. Now, this chopper timing, and back up here at 2458, defines stealth chop. If you're using one of the trinamic drivers, you'll probably want to uncomment these. I think they may have been uncommented by default or commented by default. I can't remember. But if you are using a trinamic driver, you'll want to uncomment these because that gets you that super quiet mode, which is really nice, by the way. Then down here at line 2477, if you have a 12 volt power supply in your printer, you want to leave this chopper timing, chopper default set to 12 volts. If you have a 24 volt board like the Geeetech A10m or the Ender 3 does, you'll want to set this to 24 volts. Now, here's where we go into the sensorless homing and stall guard. To do this sensorless homing, you need a driver that supports it, and I'm using the TMC 2209s, and they do support it. And for the 2209s, this sensitivity level goes from 0 to 255. 0 means it doesn't work at all. You say you try and home X is going to go all the way over to its stop and then go until you turn the printer off. 255 means a slight breeze from your ceiling fan will cause it to stall out. I found 80 works really well for me. Now, this is another one of those things that no matter what I make the changes here to, it will not change it when I flash it. It just does not. And again, I have not figured out why, but it doesn't. And this is a setting that had me scratching my head that made me finally figure out that everything was not flashing correctly. Because no matter what I did, I couldn't get this to work. And then there is an entry for it on the LCD. I looked at it and realized it's still set to 0. So once I started making the changes on the LCD panel itself and saving it to firmware there, then sensorless homing started to work. And honestly, it starts to work, and it's really well. It's very soft over against the stops. Far softer, in my opinion, than the mechanical limit switches ever were. So 80 is a really good number for me. I have never had it stall out during a print, and I can say it is very soft against the stops. At least I think it's soft against the stops. Now, down at line 2562, define improved homing reliability. I uncommented this. I think, again, it was Chris who said uncommented over on his channel. I have commented it out and uncommented it, and I can't tell any difference. Maybe it's one of those things like this up here. Maybe it's one of those things that just isn't flashing, but homing is working very well for me, so I'm just going to leave it. Uncommented. Now coming down the line 2581, define square wave stepping. Again, I don't know if this was Chris or somebody else said to uncomment this on modern boards, that it really makes a square wave really makes it more accurate. I commented it and I uncommented it, and I can't tell any difference so far, but I believe it's worthwhile to leave it there for now, so I did. If TMC debug is commented out, you'll want to uncomment it if you have TMC drivers, trinamic drivers. And I believe that's it. That's the last change I made to configuration ADVH. And if you have any questions about this, please ask me. I'll be happy to answer them as best I can. If you have any suggestions for me as to why some of the things that I've flashed are not flashing, I'd love to hear it and try it. Anyway, I'm going to get out of Marlin right now and go back to the printer because I want to take another minute or two just to discuss would I do this again and do I think it's worth it. So hang with me.
Okay, so since I know some of you are going to ask me how the sensorless homing looks and sounds, let's give it a go. None of the end limit switches are plugged in at the board. Everything is sensorless now, so, well, the Z is on the BL Touch or the 3D Touch, but the X and Y are both using sensorless homing with stall guard. So let's go to movement and home again. And there you have it. There is sensorless homing on X and Y, and of course the 3D touch homing on Z. And it's really soft and it sounds really good, and I have had no problems with it since getting it first set up. So let's get on to my final conclusions on this whole thing. So now that it's all back together and working again, I think it's only fair to ask the question of, was this worth it? And I think we have to assume that most of the parts Geeetech is sending out are not bad. I've got an SKR 1.3 board and a 2208 drivers in one of my Ender 3s, and they're fine. So if we take into it, and we're going to have to break this down a bit. We have the SKR 1.4 turbo board, we have the drivers, and we have the LCD panel. Let's start with the LCD panel. If you don't like touch screens, and you don't want color, and you don't want any of the stuff that goes along with that touch screen, and I have to admit, some of it's pretty neat and some of it is not, then the touch screen absolutely is not going to be worth it to you. Don't even bother. Stick with the regular blue and white LCD panel that just uses the rotary push button. That works fine. You lose a few features. It doesn't have as much capability of putting G-code commands in, but then again on this printer I cannot, or at least so far I haven't been able to get the mix commands to work from the touch screen. I've got to go back into the old, blue and white Marlin screen for that. So it probably isn't worth it to you. If you like touch screens and all that, then it absolutely, I think, is worth the 15 bucks it costs to buy it. The 2209 drivers, man, they're quiet. They're so quiet, the fans drown them out. You can't hear anything. You can't hear the printer, anything from the printer over the fans. That is really nice. I am now a new fan of sensorless homing. Why have all those extra wires and extra parts when you don't need them? It's just more clutter in your control box, and it's another point of failure that doesn't have to be there, especially the mechanical ones. I've probably, in the last 3.5 years since I've been doing this, I've probably replaced at least 3 of those mechanical end stop switches. Maybe I'm getting crappy ones, I don't know. They seem to fail every now and again. And of course your whole printer is down if you don't have spares. So sensorless homing kind of takes that out. I mean, I'm sure there'll be issues with that as well. I'm brand new to it. But I like the 2209 drivers. Now, the SKR 1.4 turbo board. I don't know. That's a tough call. I'm upset with the fact that there is still only one fan on it you can control. That just seemed like a big time missed opportunity to me. It is very fast. There's none of the lag in it that there is, and especially in the older 8-bit boards. It works really nice. I have no complaints. There's lots of fan connectors. There's enough to run. You can run dual Z motors on it. You can run dual, 2 extruders on it. It has a lot of functionality, and it seems to, once you get a good one and the good drivers, it seems to work very well. So I think it is a worthwhile upgrade if you're building a printer from scratch or if you have a failed board. Now they do have Geeetech has a new board, the 2.0 board, or the 2 board, SKR 2 board. It seems like it has some problems right off the bat with it, but I'm sure they'll get that ironed out. They've already apologized for it and say they're sending out replacements where it's repaired. If you have a Geeetech A10m, is this a worthwhile upgrade? If your printer is already functioning fine with the original board, hell no. Stay with the original board. It worked really well until it failed. If you have a Geeetech A10m with a failed board in it, now it gets a little stickier. It is a lot easier just to buy another stock board. And your printer will be back up. You're out 40, you're probably 50 bucks, 55 bucks by the time it gets to you. If you get a good one, half hour later, you're back working again. If you go the route that I went, this should have been a 2-day upgrade for me. 1 day to do the mounting and get everything in place, and another day to do the wiring and get Marlin going. At worst, 3 days. But it should have been 2 days. The fact that I got a bad stepper and then a bad board, that turned 2 days into 2 or 3 weeks, and that should not have happened. I'm going to assume that Geeetech doesn't send out lots of bad parts, and I just got unlucky. Had I bought these parts from China and not from Amazon, this 2 to 3 weeks would have gone probably into 3 or 4 months. But Geeetech on Amazon was very quick to respond to me. Maybe it was because it was Amazon, I don't know. But nonetheless, they were very quick. They got parts out to me. So, was it worth it? For me, the answer is yes. I enjoy this kind of stuff. I like tinkering with stuff. I like tweaking stuff. I like making my brain work to solve problems, and it just gives me a lot of fun to do new things. Is it worth it to you? Only you can answer that one. If the board in your Geeetech A10m is bad, this is a worthwhile upgrade, but you are going to work for it. So that's all I got for you. That's all I can really say. If you have any questions, please let me know below, and I'll do my very best to answer them and to help you. And like I mentioned earlier, if you can think of any reason why some of these changes in Marlin are not flashing to the board, even though I'm getting no build errors and the flashing goes correctly, let me know. I'd love to solve that one. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe and hit notifications. Use my affiliate links if you can. They don't cost you any more. And I'll catch you guys in the next one. Bye for now.